So today we're going to continue on the Space Explorer app, and this video is going to be all about users. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that Apollo has the ability to do authentication and authenticated requests. And that's why we have the Apollo file open, and this is inside of the next library. And before we write any code, we will need to add a library so that we can access. So I'm going to install JS cookie, and then we can import JS cookie like so. And let's write our first function. And the function here is going to be able to get the token, which we are storing in that cookie. That's why we installed JS cookie. Now we'll only be able to get the cookie from the browser or the client side. So if we're on the server side, we have to return null instead. Because on the server side, when we're sending a request, the cookie will be automatically sent with the with credentials option for fetch instead of as a bearer token like this. The next step is that we actually need to make use of this function. So I'm going to scroll down to where our link is, so the HTTP link, and that's because we're going to make another link. And this is going to be an instance of Apollo link, which as the argument, it takes in a function with two arguments, operation and forward. And what an Apollo link does is it's going to customize how the fetch request is going to be processed. So all the operations and options are going to be merged into one request for each query. But all we're going to do is take the operation and set the context, and we're going to add the authorization header to it, where we're using the get token. And then lastly, to make sure that this Apollo link works, we need to return the forward of operation. So we're forwarding the operation. And then the last thing that we need to do is inside of create client, we're going to customize this link property so that it combines the auth link and the HTTP link. And we can do that with a function from Apollo called concat. And that's pretty much all we need to do inside of this Apollo file. So I'm going to go back up here and make sure that concat is in the right place. Okay, so before we go back to our client, we're going to need to generate some new GraphQL operations inside of the user GraphQL. Oh, I forgot we actually already have the JWT one. That's helpful, but we still need more. So let's start with a fragment on user so that we can make a mytrips query. And this is going to be a me query. But if you remember, the me query also comes with all of the trips, so we could also get the launch. And right now I'm gonna hardcode the mission size here because I'm starting to get a little lazy, so don't judge me too hard on that. Also for convenience, let's make a fragment on our trip update response, which we need success, message, and launches, and then we'll spread out the launch the same way we did in our me query. Now with the trip update response fragment, we can now define the other mutations that we need, and those are the two that has to do with trips. Remember that book trips takes an input of an array of IDs, while cancel trip can only take in one ID. But we'll feed in the variable the same way and then ask for the results of trip update results. Now I kind of actually don't like these execute mutation lens in VS Code, but whatever. But now that we've defined all the user related queries and mutations, let's remember to nx run the GraphQL generate command, and it looks like I misspelled large. So it's supposed to be all caps and not capitalized. So let's make that fix and rerun the generate command. And now we should have all the programmatically created types and hooks for us to use. Okay, so with that out of the way, I believe we can go ahead and start making some changes to our client application. And let's start by creating a login page. So that'll be login.tsx, and this will be something a little bit like this. Now we're gonna need the use login mutation, and I'm gonna set notify on network status change to true, so we'll get loading to change immediately when the query is sent. Now this is pretty much all we can do in the login page until we have the email form component created. So let's go into the comment module, and that's where I'm going to make the email form.tsx. Alright, so let's start by defining what we want inside of the props. And let's also make sure we add the generic in here. Alright, so I think the way I want to do this is to only take in one thing, and that's going to be the onSubmit function, because this email form is only going to have one field, which is the email string. So we could go ahead and take the onSubmit and then create a helper function in here called handleSubmit, where we call that input function of onSubmit. Now we're also going to use the state so we can hold the email and set email, and that's how we're going to call the onSubmit by sending in the email like this. Now the reason why we need to extract a handleSubmit function is because the input here is going to be the raw HTML form event, which we need to handle prevent default, or else it'll try to submit the form against our server, which we don't want. And then lastly, we just need to send in handle submits to the forms on submit. After that, we just need to create a field for the email. This actually should be called email. The HTML input is going to have a bunch of attributes, so we'll make sure that it's required. ID, type, and name are all going to be email. We can have a little placeholder of login email. And then value is going to be the email state that we have. And then finally, on change is where we're going to use the set email. And we're going to set the state to e.target.value. Now the last thing we need is a submit button. But since we're here, we're going to do some styling. And I would also want to reuse that button. So we're going to create another component for just the button. But not before we add a CSS class name for email form, which for that we'll need to import CSS from the common module CSS. Now before we write the CSS, let's make that button. And from a JavaScript perspective, this button's going to be really simple, where all we're doing React-wise is adding a CSS class of button. But from a TypeScript perspective, this is kind of complicated because we're extending the normal HTML React wrapper of a button. So this is the detailed HTML props of a React button HTML attributes of an HTML button element. Now I'm unsure of how important it is to know this, because this is pretty complicated TypeScript, in my opinion at least. But I wanted to include it because this is a very common use case of using a React component to extend a normal HTML element. So here it is. Okay, now we need to define those styles. So let's open up common module, and I'm gonna scroll down so we have some space. So the two classes that we have to style is .button as well as .email form. And let's start with button because this is gonna be a lot. So first we're gonna make sure that it's display block. Then we'll add the sizing properties so that it has a certain width and height as well as margin and padding. Then we'll add border and border radius so that it'll be rounded on the corners. Then we'll add the font related attributes. So it'll be white text as well as a 700 font weight. And then the background color is the accent variable that we have earlier from our global styles. And this is the purplish color. And then we'll add cursor pointer and outline none for normal button related fields. That's a lot of attributes for a button. Right now we need to do email form. And since the email form class encompasses all of the form, we'll actually have more than one here because we'll use a descendant selector so we could style each element individually. The label is not going to be too crazy. We'll just add spacing and make sure that it is a normal font weight. The input, however, is going to be a little more complicated. We're going to first do the width of 100%, add some padding and margin, define the border so that it's rounded, and then it's also using the primary color as the outline of it. Make sure that we're using our custom text color. And then finally, we also need to define the placeholder text to be text secondary. All right, I believe that's everything we need to go back to our login page. And we can do email form here, which takes in an on submit, which we need to define. And all we're gonna do for on submit is we're gonna do the login mutation. And let's set it to a variable of results so we can console log it, so that we can test out this page by doing a handle submit here. And what we're expecting here is the login, or not the login, is the JWT token. So we'll need to serve the server as well as the client and go into our browser. And this is our login page, so we need to go to /login. And there's our login form, which I forgot to add the submit button, so we need to go do that. Email form. I mean, of all the things, right? All right, we just need to make sure that this is a type submit. And that should fix our login page. Oh, yeah, let's also add some text. All right, so it'll say login. There we go. So I'm gonna open up our console so we can see that JWT when we submit. So there we go. And we get data, login, and there's our token. So the next step is to store this token in our cookie. And that's not gonna be too hard. We'll just get rid of this console log. We also need to import cookie from JS cookie. But all we need to do here is do cookie.set, and then the JUMT is under data.login. So that'll set the cookie. And then just in case, we'll check for errors. So it only sets the cookie when we have error, or when we don't have errors. And we're not making use of this loading thing yet, so let's go add our loader from before. So then we can actually see visually that it's doing a submission. So back in our browser, we'll log in as Kelvin@mail again. Press the login. For a split second, you see the loader. But now, if we go into application, and it actually should be under cookie as token. And this is the token that we have. And the CSRF token and all the other stuff, I think it's just because I'm reusing localhost 4200. So this might be from a previous project, I don't remember. So let's just clear everything, including the tokens, or the cookies. Now the next page I want to create is the profile page. That will be profile.tsx, and it will have a title of my trips, and don't forget to export default profile so that Next.js doesn't crash. And this one is where we're going to use the use my trips query. We're also going to get the next router, and we'll do that by using the hook of use router. And this is because if we're not logged in, I want it to immediately redirect us to the login page so that we can do the login flow. But this only works on the client side, so we have to make sure that we check that it is inside the browser first. But once we do, we'll just go to push/login, and we can add the similar logic to the login page. So if we're already logged in, we'll redirect to this page instead. So in login, let's grab the use my trips query. We'll grab the data from that, and just above the return, we'll check if the me is truthy. If it is, we'll push to profile. And router is undefined because we don't have a router yet, so we need to grab that from the hook, and that should do it. Now the only thing missing from the profile page is the UI inside of the layout. So I'm gonna make another component, or a component module. So folder first, call it user, and I will call this the userlist.tsx. So once again, boilerplate. All right, and let's define what we want inside the props first. And we're gonna have the property of trips, which is all the launches. And this could be falsy just because a user might not already have any trips booked, so it might just be an empty list. So we'll add a Boolean check here before we map through the list of trips. And each trip is a singular launch with all the attributes. So we can spread out the launch into a launch card as props, and also make sure that we add the ID as a key. And then in profile, we'll add our ternary so that we can render either the user list or the loader. And the trips here is going to be data.me.trips. And we also need to import the loader, so let's do that. And now we can try this out in our browser. So we're in the login page because we're not logged in. So once we do, we should have a cookie. Now it's not redirecting because we're not refreshing the cache, which is the Apollo state. We'll have to do that in a little bit. But if we do a refresh, since we do have a cookie, it'll now automatically redirect us to the profile page. And the reason why there's stuff in here is because I forgot we tested this while we were on the API side. So that's kind of cool. So next, we need to update the cache so that it'll do the redirect after we do the login mutation. And then as a convenience, it would be good to create some sort of nav bar so it'll be easy to navigate through all of these different pages. So first, we need to go into the login page. And usually to refetch after a mutation is done, we can add another property called refetch queries inside of any of the mutation hooks. However, because we're setting a cookie, we need to delay the refetch until after we have already set the cookie. Luckily, we are using the me query here, and the hook gives us a refetch property. So we could actually do an await here to refetch immediately after we set the token. And now that'll take care of the cache updates so that once the token's set, this login page is going to be re-rendered and hit this if statement before it renders, so we'll be redirected to the profile page. Next, we can make a component, and this one's going to be inside of layout, which I'll just call it as the footer, but this footer is going to be where we're holding our nav, which is a bit unique because normally you see the nav as part of the header, but this application kind of has a more tablet-y feel, so the footer is going to be the nav component. And we're going to need the next link, as all of the nav buttons basically are going to be links to the different pages. So this first one is to the home page, and we're going to be using the home icon, and this home icon is the home SVG. Now I want the footer to also be responsible to show like whether or not a user is logged in. So we can use the me query here as well. And we'll also add a function for logging out. Now the logout function is just going to be removing the token cookie that we've had earlier. But we also need to use the client property here, so we can clear the cache of whatever is held inside the me query at that moment. And then finally, we just need to add the other buttons. But before I do, I'm going to import all of the different icon SVGs for them. Okay, so that'll be the cart icon, profile icon, and the logout icon, which is actually the exit SVG. But the rest of the links are going to be rendered inside of a ternary because we need access to the data first. Specifically, we need to know if the user is logged in, so the data.me query or me property. If they're not logged in, we'll have a link here for the path of login page. But if they are logged in, we'll have links to the cart and profile page. So the cart will have the cart icon, profile will have the profile icon with the text of profile as well. And let's make sure that we add home as text here. And then the last thing is we need a button, or more accurately, not a button, but an anchor tag here that holds the logout icon. And this one's not wrapped in a link because we're not actually going to navigate anywhere. We're just going to call the logout function that we created above. And the only other thing we need to do here is add some CSS classes. So don't forget to import that, but we'll add a footer class as well as a nav class. Actually, we'll be reusing the container class. Let's go into our layout module and write these things out. So as mentioned, the nav is going to reuse this container, and then we'll need to add a footer class. So first we'll just make sure that the background color is white, and then the text color is using the secondary text. We'll also add some flex and margin for spacing, and this one's going to be important. We're going to make it position sticky, so it just comes with the page wherever we're scrolling. And with that, we need to specify the bottom to be 0. Next, let's use descendant selectors. First, the SVG, which needs to be block so that we can display with a width and also the color of fill. This one is also going to match the same text as the other footer text. And it's margin spacing. Now the big one is going to be the anchor tag itself. And this is going to be a lot. So since we have dynamically generated anchor tags, we want to grow it so it takes up the entire space of the footer. And the text decoration and cursor is because not all of them are actual links, because our logout button is not really a button. So these two are just to make sure that they act the same. And then all of these are just styling for the text to be consistent with the rest of the footer. And I think I actually do want to customize the container inside of the footer. Most important one is going to be display flex, because we're using flex properties on both the footer and the anchor tag. So we can align them centrally, and we'll make sure that we define a max width as well as padding and margin for spacing. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know why I reused this class name, but that's okay. And then lastly, we just need to make sure the footer is actually part of the layout. So we need to go in here and add the footer. And I believe that's all we need to just take a look at it. And if we do a logout, this should just immediately take us to the login page, which it does. So that's good. So let's check if the cache updates work. If we log in, this should take us back to the profile page. And it does. And I believe that's a good stopping point, since we've added the ability of user authentication, authenticated results. The only thing left to do is maybe some finishing touches so that each individual launch is a little more personalized, as well as the ability to book and cancel trips. Oh, and also like the cart page itself is hasn't been done yet. And I think we'll save all of that for the next video, which I believe will be the final video for this project. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.